Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Formed by Jesus podcast. This is season 9. It's our last practice. I had to do the mental math. We thought it'd be fun to have Whitney on. Whitney is our outreach director here at Passion Creek, and it just made a lot of sense. Whitney helped us write this practice guide. He gave a lot of really helpful input. And as somebody whose main job it is to reach out into the community and move the church outside of itself and towards the lost and service and proximity. We wanted to just give him a chance to explain a little bit about one of the tools that we gave in this witness guide that we call the missional wheel. And so we're going to talk about that. Plus, I don't know, whatever else you want to talk about.
Anything else that I want to talk about?
Within the parameters of the practice of witness.
Oh, okay. All right.
Never mind.
We'll hold off on some of that then.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I need to remember that I'm doing the producing this week, so I have to use the switcher.
Oh, you got to
really
be
fun.
Johnny on the spot, man.
I know. Yeah, I'm doing that. Okay. Let's start with this. The missional wheel, I'll explain it and you just kind of stop me or jump in and I'll let you kind of work through it. But this was something you introduced. We did our soccer camp earlier this year, which was a huge outreach project where we basically provide a service to the families, local families of Queen Creek, for the purpose of establishing relationships, getting near people, first step, getting near people, and then also being intentional with the conversations that we want to have with them and things like that. And so one of the ways that you gave as a resource or a training for people to do this intentionally and engage in that project intentionally was the missional wheel. And so this was something that we put at the end of the guide because we saw it as a good way to kind of synthesize a lot of what the practices were going to be and how to keep it going even after these 4 weeks of the practice. So why don't you just go and explain what is the missional wheel?
Yeah, great question. So the missional wheel, I love that you brought up the whole point of, or the time when I first introduced it was when we were preparing for a big outreach event. And one of the things that I was attempting to do was to help reframe evangelism a little bit. Because I think that a lot of times, if you've grown up in the church, evangelism is really intimidating. And it's because the way that you've been taught is that you have to encounter this person that you've never met. You have to, help them to grow to like you enough that they'll listen to you for 2.5 more minutes. And in that 2.5 more minutes, you have to present the gospel and ask them to make a decision. And it just seems really high pressure, stressed, and difficult. And then if you've ever gone out and tried to do that in our culture, modern day, it is not well received at all. And therefore people, when they think of evangelism, they think of it as a 3-minute confrontational sales encounter.
Yeah.
When I think if you look in scripture, what you see is that most of the growth of the church was one friend to another friend, a family member to another family member. I think that if you go all the way back to the beginning, God's plan for discipleship was primarily through families.
Yeah.
Deep relationship and trust and familiarity, which is necessary because I remember I had a conversation with one guy that I'd been sharing the gospel with him for a long time because sometimes it does take a long time to build that relationship. And I remember the moment when he had been coming around church sometimes. He'd been in our community group for a while. He'd just been friends with me. I was playing on his soccer team. And one day he looked over at me while we were driving on our way back from coffee. And he just said to me, "Whitney, I think that almost everything that you're saying is true. But if that's true, then everything I've ever believed is a lie." And I think he helped me understand what a heavy weight the gospel carries when you are saying to somebody, "I want you to agree with me that everything you've ever thought is wrong."
Yeah.
That is heavy. And the big thing that I tell people is we need to build relationships that are strong enough to hold up the weight that we throw on somebody when we share with them the truth of the gospel.
Yeah,
and
to hold the weight of their crumbling worldview that you are dismantling. You can't that's such a good point. I never thought about that when you share the gospel, you're essentially helping what you want them to do is dismantle their presuppositions, their assumptions about life, and not just about heaven or hell. And it's not just about adding Sunday to like their weekly routine. It's, you're asking them to redefine reality based on something that they have previously rejected. And the implications of that, like, will not like sustain their discipleship to Jesus if there's not a relational like framework or something, which is where the church should come in. But even what you're saying is like, there's a, like, you should have such a good relationship with this person or these people that when that crumbles and when they choose to commit, like, they're leaving behind something that like your relationship should be able to hold the weight of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I love, as we've gone through this practice, we began with the functional definition of witness, and it's that it grows out of your witness, which I absolutely love. That it's this, your relationship with Jesus overflows to the people that you are, surrounding yourself with. But then even the person that you're attempting to witness to have spent enough time with them that there's trust, that they know that even as the rest of their world is crumbling, they can find a safe place in you as a friend that has been with them for a while. I loved that. And so going back to the missional wheel is mainly attempting to reframe evangelism and really just say to people like, hey, what if instead of, thinking of evangelism as an event that happens in 3 minutes or less, we actually broke apart all the little component pieces of what we train people to do when we used to train people to share the gospel in 3 minutes or less, but break it apart and sort of dissect it and give people time to accomplish each one of these steps. And so the way that I've seen it broken down is the first thing is an introduction. That's step one. If you want to share anything of worth with somebody, it helps to begin with, hi, my name is. That sounded like Slim Shady, but not that. And so you have to start with, my name is, what's your name, an introduction, like a very simple, seemingly non-spiritual element of a relationship. And then the next thing is just general conversation with somebody. This is the very vague stuff. How you doing today is an example of general conversation. Before eventually you've talked about, your car, the HOA, you've talked about what you do for a living. You've built this time to share about your favorite football team. Before eventually you move from general conversation to eventually, as a Christian, your spiritual life should be a pretty significant part of your world. And so you're going to drop in hints of spiritual conversation, and it can be as small as telling somebody that you went to church. It could be a little bit more intentional in explaining to somebody what the pastor said on Sunday that has really stuck with you. It could be as simple as, hey, I'm praying for something. Can I pray for you? Do you pray? Do you go to church? Do you have a Bible? I think questions are vital all the way through this path around the missional wheel. But the third level is just introducing spiritual conversation. Then the fourth level is where it begins to turn a little bit more personal for you on the faith side, because you're going to share gospel content with somebody. Now, not asking for a gospel decision. That's the next step. The first step is just sharing gospel content with somebody. And so this is just really easy. That's a weird phrase and it sounds weird, but it's just sharing with somebody the difference that Jesus has made, or the difference that Jesus could make. The difference that Jesus has made in your own life. That's sharing your story with somebody, where you're telling them, this is what the good news of the kingdom of Jesus has done for me. It could be looking at the world around you and seeing the brokenness and lamenting it with some guy who's not a Christian, has no belief in God, but you could then immediately say, man, if only things were the way that God wanted them to be. And all of a sudden you've got an opportunity to explain how in God's kingdom there is no sickness, there is no strife, there's no war, there's no sorrow, there's no relational breaking. And so all of these are ways to introduce gospel content before finally you ask somebody for a gospel decision. And right there is where I think that we probably need the most training, because a lot of us we feel nervous, like we're actually going to, like we are attempting to do something to this person. But really, if you've walked all the way around through all of these levels with somebody, what you're actually doing is you're just sharing what has changed your life in a good way and asking, do you want that too? Do you think God could do this for you? And, I think about a great line I heard one time from a poem written by John Piper, meek and treasuring, asking, do you know my king? And I feel like that's a beautiful picture of what that gospel decision moment could look like. Not a confrontational question that forces somebody to, take a huge stand, but meek and treasuring, asking, do you know my king? And I think that when you look at it in all of its component parts, it's less intimidating because you can see where steps 1 through 3, it's just about making a friend. And just look at the statistics of the loneliness in our world and our culture right now. People are desperate for friends and they have no idea how to make them. Like I'm a guy in my 40s. Literally this morning, I was on a text with 2 other guys where we're like awkwardly trying to figure out how do we become friends? We're like, we're going to get together in 2 weeks. And one of them was like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. We're going to hang out, man. And yet that everybody longs for a friend. And so when you're using the missional wheel as a framework for what does it mean for me to build a relationship that helps somebody come closer to Jesus? That's what it's all about. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a stick. It's not even really a method. It's just a framework for understanding how do your relationships eventually lead towards Jesus.
So I think with the missional wheel, this could happen in one conversation, but it could also happen kind of stretched out over like months of getting to know someone. So how would that be different? Like what would that change the missional wheel at all? Or like ideally, how would someone take this? And let's say they like the framework. What's like the next step? How do they, do you get what I'm asking?
Oh, I do. Because it's like, okay, so, with evangelism, the idea, old school idea of, okay, 3 minutes or less, we've got to push for a decision and, present the gospel, say the right things. This is very different because it's almost a framework for how you view all of your relationships. And so the fun part or terrifying is that you could actually map every relationship in your life onto the missional wheel. This past week, I was at GLS, Global Leadership Summit, and I met this lady who walks up to me and, she's like, do you live in Eastmark? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Do you live in Eastmark? And she's like, do you live on Kinetic Drive? And I was like, I do. Are you my neighbor? Yeah. And she was like,
I hope you're my neighbor. This is getting, please stop.
It's getting weirder, but she continues on. Apparently she lives in a house that is like 3 houses down from mine and has for like 6 years. And so she would be in the category of people in my life that I've driven past, that I have seen, and I've never taken the first step of a gospel conversation with her, which is introducing myself. I just drive past her as if she's scenery in the backdrop of Whitney's amazing story of life. When in actuality, she maps onto my missional wheel. And the question is, am I going to be intentional to recognize which people God has put in my life and I haven't slowed down enough to introduce myself to? And you can continue down. Then there are the people that you've been introduced to, but you don't know that much about, your neighbors, most likely. The missional wheel, it works really well when you think about, again, the functional definition of witness that we're using. Like, again, talk about the witness, the idea that there are people that are in proximity to us that we are just passing by day after day. And it's like, I think that if we were to adopt an incarnational approach like Jesus, all of a sudden it would go from just being in proximity one another to actually having real presence with each other. And so, again, every person in your life can map onto some stage in the missional wheel. And it just helps you become more intentional with, well, where's that guy on my wheel? How could I help him go from general conversation to what could I say that would introduce spiritual conversation? So I just view it as a framework that can apply to every relationship, and it just helps you bring intentionality to what you're doing.
Yeah, I think what I like about it, so our 4 practices, and they kind of map onto this really well, I think. Like, our very first practice was incarnation, where we talked about what you're saying, like proximity, getting near people. The first step is not street evangelism, though some may be called to that. I don't know. Or like random, whatever, going up to people on the street or whatever. But I think for most of us, that is not the next step we're going to take. The next step we're going to take is noticing who's in our social circles already. So that was one part of the practice from last week, which was just write down these names. So like that woman that you had in your neighborhood,
Jennifer.
You didn't even know. Yeah, say her name.
I know her name now.
Put people in those categories. But this is the tough thing too, is you're not trying to do this so that you can get something out of them. And I think that's what's tricky, that I actually think the missional wheel kind of solves that issue a little bit, is with witness. When you start to talk about the practice of witnessing or sharing your faith, the assumption is that people will start to feel like they're just trying to establish relationships so they can get a decision or an end goal or something. So they can get something from someone. And I think what the missional wheel does is it gives you, like you're saying, a framework. If you were to be intentional about all of your relationships, this is a really easy, simple way to kind of map on those relationships and figure out what those next steps are. So incarnation is like the introduction part of the wheel, where you're just getting near people, introducing yourself to people that are already in the places that you frequent, like weekly, the other parents at your kids' soccer practice, or if you have the same barista, on your way to work or whatever it is, you start to introduce yourself to them for the purpose of establishing that relationship. And then general conversation is one of the practices we'll get to, which is conversation. How do you have intentional conversations, not just about like the gospel right away, but there's all sorts of study about how small talk actually creates a safe space for people. And so you need that like established trust that happens after conversations about the weather and like the heat and the busyness of your schedule and life and whatever, so that you can then move on to something like spiritual conversations, where you're able to intentionally, like you're saying, bring up your faith or whatever in a way that's not weird. And then by the time you get to like gospel content and gospel decision, gospel content is we would say like our practice of narration, where you're framing the gospel as I think you had said this too, like, here's what Jesus has done for me. You don't have to have all the theological answers to whatever questions they have, but just being able to explain your story in light of the gospel is a form of presenting the gospel to somebody. Yeah. And then our last practice is invitations, actually inviting them to something, whether that's dinner at your house for more conversation, or coffee to get to know them, or if it's an invite to follow Jesus, or an invite to church or something like that. And so I like that a lot. Why do you think this works? We've talked a lot about like our cultural moment and how I think the elevator pitch method worked.
It did.
For very specific reasons, but I think that something like this actually fits our cultural waters a little more. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think totally. I loved on this past Sunday, Trey brought out the acronym WEIRDER for where our culture is right now, that we are weirder. And I had him write it down. I did not memorize these things, but it's,
you didn't have to say that. You could
I know.
Just...
I felt bad just acting like I knew that it was Western educated,
and whatever else.
Yeah. And all those other ones that are right over there. But yeah, I found that's so helpful, because it frames where we are as a culture and all the reasons why the tools that we used 50 years ago no longer apply. I mean, just think about the massive changes that our culture has gone through just in the last 15 years. It's astounding that we've gone from the place where, the president, the leader, Barack Obama, leader of the Democratic Party at that time when he was elected, he refused to endorse gay marriage, to where we are now in our culture. and just the dramatic change that has happened around us. And all of that just points to the fact that our strategies need to change with the times around us. And so I think that what it does is it gives more of an opportunity to build that safety net that you were describing. Like, yeah, small, seemingly pointless small talk actually is meaningful in the same way that, like, a small brick is pretty worthless, but if you keep stacking them on top of each other, eventually you have a house. And so all that small talk adds up to something significant. And I think it helps give time for us to overcome a lot of the ways that our culture has shifted, so that people feel safe with Christians who, generally speaking, we're pretty strange to the people who are around us. We believe in a dead guy that lives again. That already. Start right there.
Which, by the way, was just as weird in the first century as it is today. I think we forget that. I think there's that thing of like the misconception today is that this way of life, this philosophy or religion or whatever, however you'd categorize Christianity, was more normal back then. But you can read, first century primary documents of how Christians were perceived, and the practice of eating flesh and like having these love feasts, which were communion, is what we would call communion. From the outside world, they looked like insanely bizarre. But I love that that unashamed confidence in practicing that community was so radically countercultural to like the Greco-Roman world at the time that it was almost compelling and inviting. And then to bridge the gap between like how do you then bring people from like the default waters of the culture that they're swimming in to like that completely different community is through what you were naming, which is like the proximity, the relationships with people we already have. I think the missional wheel is helpful because it helps people do that. Because I think all of us can name, friends or whatever. We can put our social circles on pieces of paper, but then actually taking the next step can seem really like disorienting and intimidating. And so the missional wheel, I think, gives us an opportunity to do what the first century church did, which is be like unashamed in our weirdness, but then have some kind of, not even strategy, because that feels weird of a word to use, but having some kind of method or intentionality to bringing people into that community. So,
because the ideal scenario would be that as you're building these relationships, again, it's part of our witness. One of the places we should be inviting lost people that we want to share the gospel with is into the spaces where our Christian friends are. Like that's my go-to first move when I'm encountering somebody with whom I want to share the gospel is, man, you got to meet my friends.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty limited, but we are pretty cool.
Yeah. I think the tendency is to shy away from, well, it's almost like, and I think someone was mentioning this in our Together group this week, that the thing that stops is we're so good at compartmentalizing, and whatever tool it is, whether it's the missional wheel or something like that, the benefit that these tools give us is that we merge all of a sudden. We're able to kind of merge those worlds together, where we bring Sunday into the parent pickup line at school, or the after school meeting with the teacher or whatever, these places where these worlds collide and overlap. And for a lot of us, I think the trouble is we're just not thinking about our faith. If we're honest, we're not thinking about our stories or how Jesus has changed our lives when we're talking to the barista for the third time this week or whatever.
Yeah.
And that compartmentalization is what I think makes witness really difficult. But for something like the missional wheel, it does kind of help give us a way to merge those worlds together. Yeah. Inviting people to participate in the life of the Christian community is a really I don't know. It could be really intimidating if you have weird friends. I don't know. But
yeah. Well, we've all had that experience where you invite your school friends. You're in elementary school and you invite your school friends and a couple of your baseball friends and then your church friends to your birthday party.
Yeah.
And it's just weird.
Or it's we had that experience at our wedding. I mean, we got married almost 7 years ago. So you have all these different worlds colliding and your parents are now talking to your coworkers, and it's this is a weird I don't think I like this.
I
or
don't
whatever.
think I want y'all to say things to each other.
Yeah, I remember in I was in like third or fourth grade. I was going to VBS in Texas, and so it was like VBS,
It was
like it was
real.
legit VBS, and they
Salty the Songbook was there.
yes, Salty the Songbook. Thank you so much. That's incredible. I've been showing my kids Salty videos,
Oh, it's
hoping that they
amazing.
would like.
Yes.
Be as traumatized as I was. My mom, this is completely, Trey might have to edit this out. My mom, oh, this is embarrassing. I was so into Salty as a kid that my mom made me a cardboard box Salty
That's
costume
amazing.
that I would wear and stick my hands through. If you don't know what this is, that's okay. Don't Google
Yeah,
it. Don't
you
look it
don't
up.
need it.
But I went to VBS and it was really intense, and they were giving away this like, I don't think it was like a swimming pool raft or something to whoever brought the most friends. And so I brought all my friends, my neighbors and classmates, and they were all mingling, and we were doing like the worship service before VBS started, and they were doing like all the motions and everything. And I knew them all, and a few of my friends did, but there was like one girl who I don't know her name or I don't remember her at all, but I just it's embedded into my like core memories is looking over at her and seeing her like so uncomfortable. She had never been in church before. Like all these people are singing these weird songs and doing motions, and she was like traumatized.
Yeah.
And I think like that will not happen most of the time, but there is something about bringing people into that community that is unashamed in who they are. And I think in today's world, it's refreshing too, to see like an authenticity that isn't harmful to others. Well, it shouldn't be, to see a community living out what they believe in a way that's like truly like service oriented towards others. And, where maybe they do weird motions at VBS or whatever, but there's like a genuine love being displayed. Cause I think that meets the need of like the culture that we're in is like the missional wheel. The bad way I think to think about it is as a strategy to get people to like make decisions for Jesus.
Yeah. This is my project.
Yeah, you turn it into like a project. So every relationship becomes a project. You could gamify it in a way that's really weird and unhelpful. But I think a good way to see this missional wheel is as a way to like lovingly invite people to experience the life that you've experienced in a way that's not threatening and in a way that actually like meets their needs, whether they realize that they have needs or not, of needing like authentic community and like a genuine like love that isn't based on their performance, and like a hope, a community committed to living by a radical hope in something transcendent that surpasses worldly like all of these things that the gospel offers can only be experienced if people participate in the community of like gospel minded people. And so what the missional wheel does is it gives you a way to bring those people into that, and to use the relationships, like we keep saying, that you already have around you, and bring them into that life. So
Yeah. I love it. I think it's intentionality with those relationships, not pressure. And then I think also I love it so much because it gives you time where you can celebrate all the little wins, like, just getting an introduction to your neighbor that you avoid because you don't know their name, but you should, having the courage to introduce yourself again, man, that's a step worth celebrating.
Yeah.
For somebody to speak up and just ask questions of somebody that they've been acquaintances with, but they don't really know. That's worth celebrating because it's not making it into a project. It's just giving intentionality to deepen that relationship. And so, again, I think it's an amazing thing when you see somebody who's just intentional about the way that they love and care for the people that God has put around them.
Yeah.
And people see it and they take notice, and it changes hearts when somebody experiences someone that's not selling to them, that someone who's seeing them, hearing from them, and then just sharing. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, there's something about, I think, like offering, because it is a risk, like doing this, having an intentional conversation, whether it's general or spiritual or whatever, is like a little bit of a gamble, because you're stepping out in faith and you're kind of breaking the like social expectations of whatever situation you're in. So like people don't expect you to talk about like money, religion, or politics. And if that's your goal, is to eventually talk about at least one of those, you are going against the grain a little bit, and that carries a risk factor with it. And so what this essentially is you kind of offering what you can to God and trusting that God is working behind the scenes. The Spirit is already moving, and you're just trying to help, like, participate in what God is doing by helping people move from one part of the wheel to the other or whatever. So maybe, I don't know, this has been going on for a while. I think about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So you've been a part of our community for a while now. I think you know us pretty well. And in your role as like an outreach director, what would you hope to see our church step into this next season as we finish this practice related to the missional wheel? How do you want us to use it? But also even just broadly, like if you were to kind of cast a vision for how you want our people to be formed as our outreach director, I want you to kind of connect your role to this. So like, what are you hoping for?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I want to see this truly become a practice of our church. Like I want to see this. And I think there's a reason that the missional wheel resonates with you and Trey when you hear that, because really what it is, it's giving people a framework so that you can release them.
Yeah.
And it's like if the goal of outreach was for Whitney to create events that you can bring your lost friends to, that's not making disciples out of our community of believers. It's telling them, hey, you just bring the people, I'll do the work. That's not the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
The way of Jesus was explaining to people the kingdom and then sending them out and releasing them. And I think that a lot of churches today are uncomfortable putting people in a position where they're going to experience the discomfort of being a disciple.
Yeah.
We would rather keep you comfortable and happy.
That's good.
And in the walls of the church, and we'll just worry about those precious few that we send outside the walls. We'll give them a name, like a missionary.
Sure, yeah.
Never mind that every Christian is supposed to be an emissary of God everywhere that we go. Those few people. And so what do I want? I would love for this framework to make the mission of God accessible to every person at Passion Creek, so that really evangelism and witness is happening without the leadership's knowledge. It is happening beyond a place where we can control it. And instead of Passion Creek being, a church that exists within a, boundaries of what it means to be a Passion Creek person, instead, we are Passion Creek people who are released into the wild in order to witness with other people. And so I'm going to, work with people to pool the resources that we have at Passion Creek to create cool events and give people in our church the opportunity, a space to invite their lost friends into. But my hope is that there's inviting happening every day of the week, that there is intentionality that is being displayed in relationships every day of the week. And so I would love it if all I were doing was encouraging our church believers as they are building these deep relationships that can hold the weight of the gospel. And I'll step in from time to time when somebody gets stuck, help somebody if they feel like they got stumped, like I didn't know what to say. The most important thing is it probably didn't matter what you said. You were there,
Yeah.
which is way better than anybody who could have answered the question. And so all of those things, I'll be there to encourage and to help guide. But for the most part, I want to see the people of Passion Creek take on the calling to be a witness for Christ, to proclaim the excellencies of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light in every place that you go. And that would be the dream, is that we would be making disciples who are ready to be sent out.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, thank you for being here, for helping write this part of the wheel. It's at the back of the guide. So if you picked up one of these, or if you find it online, you can find it at the end. And again, it's just a really simple way, I think, to synthesize all of our practices into one framework that you can take and continue using even after this practice. So I really like that. I think that, that our hope is that you would use this. And and just take whatever it is, like whatever God's inviting you to do next. You don't have to get your whole, neighborhood block to experience revival, but if you're able to have one conversation, I think that's a win. So,
Amen.
Awesome. Thank you. That's it.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
Do you remember to record?